All right, so diving in today. And look, let's be real for a sec. You're here, so you probably already get that whole red pill thing, right?
Right.
Seeing the world, like,
Oh, yeah.
for what it is. No sugarcoating.
Yeah.
But here's the thing. Knowing, it's only half the battle. This deep dive, it's all about what comes after you see things for what they are. It's about boundaries.
That's exactly where the book, Red Pill Boundaries, Protect Your Mind and Life, gets super interesting, you know? It's not just about, like, getting all this red pill knowledge crammed in your head.
Yeah.
It's about how to actually use that knowledge, how to apply it in your life without, getting totally lost or overwhelmed.
Yeah.
Because let's be honest, sometimes that truth, it hits hard.
It really does. And we're not just talking theory here, right?
Oh, absolutely not.
This book, it gets into the actual nitty-gritty of how to use boundaries, to actually improve your life.
Yeah.
Like, not just surviving, but actually thriving.
And what I find fascinating is how the book ties this whole concept of boundaries to psychology, Like, remember Freud, all that stuff about the ego and where your sense of self ends and other people begin.
Yeah.
Well, the book argues that boundaries, that's how we actually make that real in our lives, I mean. It's like drawing a line in the sand, defining your own space, your territory.
Okay, I like that. So let's unpack this a bit. The book starts off by laying out this whole red pill metaphor.
Mm-hmm.
And it's become a real cultural phenomenon, hasn't it?
Oh, for sure.
Particularly online.
Yeah.
Especially within what they call the manosphere. That's kind of like that online space where, a lot of men are discussing these sorts of issues, these men's issues. But the book makes a really important point early on.
Yeah.
Simply knowing about the red pill, it's not enough.
It's so true. It's like, imagine you have this toolbox, right?
Yeah.
Full of all these amazing, powerful tools, but you have absolutely no clue how to use any of them. You could end up hurting yourself more than actually helping.
Yeah, that's a good point.
The book argues that boundaries, they give you that structure, those safety measures you need to actually wield that red pill knowledge effectively.
So it's like the boundaries are like the user manual for the red pill.
You got it. That's a fantastic way to put it. And the book doesn't just stay surface level either. It really delves into the psychology. Like, why do men in particular struggle with setting boundaries?
Right.
And it uses actual research to back up its claims. Like, for instance, there's this study they cite from Stanford University, and it found that men who were good at setting boundaries, they actually reported having higher self-esteem.
It makes sense when you think about it. I mean, if you're constantly letting people just walk all over you, it's got to chip away at your sense of self-worth.
Yeah.
It's like you're telling yourself your needs and desires, they just don't matter as much.
Exactly. And the book even suggests that this whole thing can turn into this nasty, vicious cycle, know? The lower your self-esteem gets, the harder it becomes to actually assert yourself, to set those boundaries in the first place.
So how do you break out of that cycle? I mean, it sounds like a lot of guys, a lot of men out there, they might be stuck in this.
Yeah.
What does the book say about actually getting started with this, like setting boundaries?
Well, the first step is really understanding the psychology, right? Like, why is it so hard to set boundaries in the first place? The book goes into concepts like cognitive dissonance, which is basically, that mental discomfort we feel when our actions and our beliefs, they don't line up. Like, imagine you really value honesty, right?
Mm-hmm.
But you find yourself lying to your partner to avoid, like, a big fight. That clash, that's cognitive dissonance.
Okay. I can see how that applies to boundaries, I think.
Yeah.
Like if you believe in being the nice guy, But you also know deep down that you want to start setting some limits that could create some serious internal conflict.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And the book argues that this is especially true for men because of, the way traditional masculinity is often defined. Those phrases like suck it up or man up. They send a message that men shouldn't really express their needs or set limits. And that can create so much inner turmoil, when it comes to boundaries.
So the book is saying that those messages, they're actually harmful because they're basically discouraging men from taking care of themselves. It's a pretty bold statement.
It is, but they back it up with actual evidence. They cite a 2018 study, it was in the Journal of Men's Health, and it showed that men who really adhere to, like, that traditional view of masculinity, they're less likely to seek help when they need it.
Wow.
The book argues that this reluctance to ask for help is directly linked to this difficulty with setting boundaries. It's like they've been conditioned to believe that needing help, it's somehow weak.
And that's where the red pill comes in, right?
Exactly.
It's about seeing those harmful messages for what they are and choosing to, break free, choosing a different path.
Absolutely. The red pill in this context, it's about awareness. It's about recognizing the ways that societal expectations might actually be holding you back and then making that conscious choice to, break free.
Okay. That's starting to make a lot more sense now. But how do you actually go about setting these boundaries? I mean, it's one thing to recognize the problem, but it's another thing entirely to actually change your behavior. What kind of concrete steps does the book suggest?
Well, that's where we'll dig in next time. The book, it doesn't just leave you hanging with all this theory.
Right.
It gets down to the practicalities of setting boundaries in different areas of your life, relationships, work, even your relationship with technology. It covers a lot of ground.
All right, listeners, we are about to get into the nuts and bolts of red pill boundaries. Stay tuned for part 2, where we're going to explore how to actually implement these principles in your daily life.
So we're back, and let's pick up where we left off. Let's get into the actual how-to of boundaries. The book really dives into some specific strategies for different areas of your life because, let's be honest, what works with your boss is probably not going to fly with your girlfriend.
Yep. Totally different ball game there. Yeah. But before we get into all the specifics, are there, any general principles the book lays out that kind of apply across the board, no matter the situation?
For sure, for sure. One of the biggest things is self-awareness. And I know that sounds simple, right?
Right.
But the book makes a really interesting point. A lot of men, they aren't even clear on what their own needs and limits actually are. They've spent so much time, trying to meet everyone else's expectations. Their own have just gotten completely buried.
It's like that saying, right? You can't pour from an empty cup. If you don't even know what you need, how can you even ask for it?
Oh, that's a great analogy.
Let alone set a boundary to actually protect it.
Yeah, exactly. And once you have that self-awareness, the next step is communication. And I don't mean hints or hoping people will just magically figure it out.
Right, yeah, right.
It's got to be clear, direct communication.
So no more passive-aggressive sighs, huh?
Yeah.
Or hoping your partner will just get it.
Nope. The book's a big advocate for assertive communication.
Yeah.
But it also emphasizes respect. It's not about being a jerk to people,
Right.
It's about stating your needs really firmly but politely.
This is making me think about all those times I've just avoided setting a boundary altogether.
Yeah.
Because I didn't want to, rock the boat.
Yeah.
Or hurt someone's feelings.
Yeah.
But honestly, looking back, it probably hurt both of us in the long run. Because all that resentment just built up.
Oh, absolutely. That's such a common experience. And the book definitely acknowledges that. But it also argues that in the long run, those clear boundaries, they actually protect relationships.
Oh, interesting.
Even if they feel a little uncomfortable at first. Because that resentment, it can be a real relationship killer.
Okay, so it's like ripping off a Band-Aid.
Yeah.
Short-term pain for long-term gain.
I like that. That's a good way to think about it. And now, let's actually get into some of those specific areas the book covers, because, like we said, each one kind of has its own, nuances.
Okay, let's start with the one that probably impacts every guy listening. Romantic relationships. What's the book's take on setting boundaries with a partner?
One of the most important things it emphasizes, again, is communication. But this time, it's all about expressing your needs specifically within the context of that relationship. Whether it's emotional support, physical intimacy, or just needing some time alone. Whatever it is for you, the book says you got to be upfront about it.
So no more just hoping your partner will, intuitively know what you need.
Yeah.
Or what you want.
Exactly. The book argues that that's a recipe for, pure frustration and disappointment. It's about having those open and honest conversations, even when they're tough. And, it works both ways, too. Being open to hearing your partner's needs, finding those compromises.
So it sounds like what the book is advocating for is a relationship built on, mutual respect and clear communication.
Yes.
Not on those mind games or trying to guess each other's feelings all the time.
You got it. And that same principle, it actually applies to the work world as well, which is another big area the book really tackles, especially these days, With work-life balance being so blurry, setting those professional boundaries is more important than ever.
Yeah, no kidding.
Yeah.
It's like we're always on now, thanks to email and smartphones and all that.
Yeah.
It's hard to just switch off. Is the book, saying we need to ditch technology completely to set boundaries?
Not necessarily, but it does advocate for being more intentional about how we use it,
Okay.
Setting those clear work hours, communicating when you're actually available to your colleagues and clients, and honestly, learning to say no when you're already overloaded. Those are all really key strategies the book recommends.
So it's about taking control of your workload, basically, instead of letting it control you.
Precisely. It's about remembering you're a human being with limits. You're not some machine that can just run 24/7. And it's also about setting those boundaries with colleagues, too.
Right.
Whether it's about interruptions or gossiping or even just respecting each other's personal space, the book really stresses how important it is to be upfront about what you're okay with and what you're not.
Okay, this is all making sense. But let's be real for a second. What about those situations where someone just keeps violating your boundaries, even after you've, like, communicated them clearly?
hmm
What does the book say about dealing with those, like, boundary pushers?
That's a tough one. And honestly, the book doesn't try to sugarcoat it. One of the most important strategies it recommends is setting consequences.
So it's like saying, okay, if you keep doing this, then this will happen.
Exactly. And those consequences, they might be different depending on the situation, of course. Maybe it means limiting contact with that person, ending the relationship entirely, or even in some extreme cases, taking legal action. The point is to send a really clear message that your boundaries, they're not just like suggestions, they're non-negotiable.
This is starting to feel kind of empowering.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not just a victim in these situations. I actually have options when someone disrespects my limits.
That's the whole point. The book is all about empowering men to take control of their own lives and to create healthier, more fulfilling relationships.
This whole red pill boundaries approach is really resonating with me, I gotta
Yeah.
say. But before we go any further, I'm curious about your personal experience with all this stuff. As a psychology expert, I mean, what were some of those aha moments for you when it came to boundaries?
Oh man, there were a few. One of the biggest for me was realizing that setting boundaries, it's not selfish. It's actually a form of self-care.
Mhm.
And self-care, that's absolutely crucial for good mental health. It's like, remember those instructions they give you on airplanes
Mhm.
about putting on your own oxygen mask first before you help others?
Oh, yeah.
Same concept. You can't show up for other people if you're running on empty yourself.
I like that. So setting boundaries is actually a way to be more present
Mm.
and engaged
Mhm.
in your relationships, your work, everything.
Exactly. It's about respecting yourself and your own needs, recognizing that you are worthy of having your boundaries honored.
That is such an important point. Setting those boundaries, it's a form of self-respect. And
Mhm.
self-respect, that's the foundation for everything else in life, isn't it?
I couldn't have said it better myself. And you know what? When you start valuing yourself that way, it changes everything. The
Right.
way you interact with the world, the way people treat you, the
Mhm.
quality of your relationships, it all shifts
Mhm.
for the better.
It's like thinking back to all those times I felt so resentful,
Right.
you know,
Yeah.
or taken advantage of. I just didn't set a boundary. Looking back, it's like I was giving other people permission to treat me that way.
Wow. That's a really powerful insight. And, the book, it actually digs into the psychology of why we might struggle with setting those boundaries in the first place.
Yeah, we touched on that earlier
Yeah.
with like the cognitive dissonance and all
Yeah.
that. But I'm guessing there's more to it, huh?
Oh, absolutely. The book explores a whole bunch of psychological concepts that can really help us understand our struggles with boundaries. Like, for example, it talks about confirmation bias, which is our tendency to, seek out information that just confirms what we already believe, even if it's not actually true.
Oh, okay, yeah. Like, I think I've seen that play out on social media all the time.
Yeah.
Like, if you already believe a certain political party is corrupt, right?
Uh-huh.
You're way more likely to believe any negative stories about them, even if they aren't true. Is that kind of what we're talking about here?
You got it. And the book argues that confirmation bias can also influence the way we view boundaries. If you already believe that setting boundaries is selfish or aggressive, you're going to interpret other people's boundaries in this negative way too. It's like you're filtering your whole experience through that belief system.
So it's not just about willpower then,
Yeah.
or just being more assertive. It's about really understanding these deeper psychological patterns that might be holding us back.
That's really fascinating. Is there anything else the book covers in terms of like the psychology of boundaries?
There's one more concept I think is particularly relevant to our discussion. It's called the Dunning-Kruger effect.
Dunning-Kruger.
Yeah.
Wait, yeah, that rings a bell. Isn't that the one where like incompetent people tend to overestimate their abilities?
You nailed it. Think about those people who are absolutely terrible singers, but they're convinced they're going to be the next American Idol.
Yeah. Classic Dunning-Kruger. And the book suggests this effect can also play out with boundaries. If you haven't really developed those boundary-setting skills, you might not even realize how weak your boundaries actually are.
It's like you're blind to your own blind spots.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. So are you saying that some people, they might need to do some serious self-reflection? just to even recognize that they have a problem with boundaries in the first place.
Exactly. And the good news is the book actually offers some guidance on how to do that self-reflection. It encourages readers to really examine their past relationships, their current behaviors, and the feedback they've gotten from other people to get a clearer picture of their own boundary landscape.
Why, this is all really hitting home for me. It's like I'm starting to see all these patterns in my own life that I wasn't even aware of before. I'm definitely going to have to pick up a copy of this book. But before we wrap up part two, I want to take a second to just talk directly to our listeners.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea.
Listeners, I know this is a lot to take in. We're diving deep into some complex stuff here, and it can feel kind of overwhelming at times. But I want to remind you, this is a journey, not a destination.
It's not about being perfect. It's about progress.
Exactly. So if you're feeling overwhelmed, that's totally okay. Just take a deep breath, be kind to yourself, and remember, we're all in this together. All right, with that said, let's move on to part three, where we'll explore even more practical strategies for setting those red pill boundaries. Stay tuned. Okay, so we're back for the final part of our deep dive into red pill boundaries. We've covered a lot, right?
We have.
From the whole red pill concept itself to, like the psychology of why boundaries can be so tricky. But let's bring it all home now. What if someone's listening to this, right, and thinking, okay, I get it. I'm ready to start setting some boundaries, but where the heck do I even begin? Like, what's the first step? What does the book actually recommend?
Well, the book has a ton of practical strategies, but one of the biggest things it emphasizes is starting small. Don't try to change your whole life overnight.
Right.
It's about picking one area where you really feel like your boundaries are the weakest and just focusing on that. Could be at work, in a relationship, or even just with how you use technology. Just pick one battle to start with and focus on winning that one first.
Okay, so baby steps, basically. Building momentum as you go. I like that. Feels way less overwhelming than trying to change everything at once. But how do you even choose that first battle? Like, where's a good place to start?
The book suggests asking yourself some key questions, like what are those situations that consistently leave you feeling drained or resentful or just like taken advantage of? What are those recurring patterns in your relationships where you just feel like your needs aren't being met? Once you've kind of zeroed in on those areas, you can start brainstorming. Think about some specific boundaries you want to set.
That makes a lot of sense. It's about pinpointing those pain points where the boundaries are missing and then figuring out what needs to change to actually protect yourself. So let's say you've done that. You've looked inward and figured out where you want to start setting boundaries. What's next? How do you actually put them into practice?
The book really stresses communication. It sounds so basic, I know, but a lot of us, we really struggle with clearly communicating what we need and what our expectations are.
Yeah, for sure.
It's about learning to be direct and assertive, but without being, aggressive or demanding. The book even gives you some actual scripts and phrases you can use in different situations.
Oh, interesting. Can you give us an example? Like, what would one of those scripts look like?
Sure. Let's say you have a coworker who's always interrupting you when you're trying to focus, right? The book might suggest saying something like, hey, I appreciate you coming to me with this, but I'm right in the middle of something. Can we talk about it later this afternoon?
Okay, so polite but firm. You're acknowledging their needs, but also setting a clear boundary around your own time and focus.
Oh.
Yeah, I can see how that would be useful. But what about those times when someone just ignores your boundaries? Like you've communicated it, but they just keep doing it anyway. What do you do then?
Well, then the book talks about consequences. It's about letting people know that your boundaries, they're not just suggestions. They're
Right.
not up for debate. If someone keeps pushing those boundaries, you might have to limit your contact with them or even end the relationship entirely. And in some extreme cases, you might even need to take legal action.
So it's about backing up your words with actions. You're not just talking the talk, you're walking the walk. That definitely sends a message.
Yeah.
But I imagine it can be really hard to actually follow through with those consequences,
Right.
especially if it involves someone you care about.
It definitely can be. But the book really drives home this point. Setting those boundaries is an act of self-respect. It's about understanding your own worth and refusing to let others treat you in a way that diminishes that. And sometimes that means making some tough choices.
Man, this whole conversation has really got me thinking about how I approach relationships, personal and professional. It's like I've been giving away my power for way too long.
And the book also talks about the importance of self-compassion throughout all this. Setting boundaries can be hard, and you're going to mess up sometimes.
Right.
You're going to make mistakes, and that's okay. The important thing is to learn from them and just keep going.
It's about progress, not perfection.
Exactly. And, I think the book's message, it really aligns with that whole red pill philosophy we were talking about. It's about taking responsibility for your own life, seeing the world for what it is, and making choices that empower you.
It's about waking up and realizing you have more control than you think.
Yes, you have the power to choose how you want to be treated, how you spend your time,
Hmm.
and who you let into your life. Setting those boundaries is just a tool to help you actually use that power.
That's a great way to put it. I think we've covered a ton today.
Mm.
And I'm personally feeling pretty inspired to start setting some stronger boundaries in my own life. Anything else you want to leave our listeners with before we wrap up?
Just this. Building a more empowered life, it starts with one boundary at a time. So pick one area you want to change. Start small, be consistent. You might be surprised at the impact it has on your whole life.
Awesome. Well, listeners, that's a wrap for our deep dive into red pill boundaries. We hope you found it helpful and empowering. Remember, setting boundaries is a way to show your self-respect, and you deserve to have your limits honored. Thanks for listening, and until next time, keep diving deep.